once I started empathizing with him and started feeling sorry for him, I took away all his power he had over me. Because when I was angry, he had so much power over me. He ruled my life. Once I flipped that on its ear, it was like
healing.
It was a weight that came off of me.
Mm.
And now, 11 years later, looking at it through different eyes, was it really a tragedy?
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
Leadership there was lacking.
I remember something when I first got promoted, and it was advice that came from a boss that I didn't actually have a super high regard for. But he told me two things that resonated me throughout my career. And he goes, to be a boss, you got two main things. One is accomplish the mission, right? And second, right behind that is look out for the betterment of your men.
Mission first, people always.
Don't look over people, look out for them.
Yep.
Right? And that's, unfortunately, too many bosses fail in that.
And you were the de facto boss, because you're where administration should have came from a point of support for you, like sending one of your own just for your comfort.
Yeah.
I don't want to cast stones at an agency I didn't even work for.
No, you can.
They, in my opinion, failed you as much as Vacaturo did at the time.
We're going to get into a little bit of Vocaturo's failure, because I'm not so sure it was a failure.
All right.
I'm not so sure it was a failure.
What was, I got to, before you were talking about how, your wife and your kids went, what else was going through your mind? What was it? Tactics? Was it, you know what I'm saying? Like, I always think about things like that. Like
during the shooting?
Yeah. Like even being in a prone position.
It made me such a smaller target. So that stuff, it was autonomous to me.
Okay.
It made me a smaller target, and that's what I thought in my head. I'm like, well, I'm not going to make it easier for you. And my thinking was, okay, you got me dead to rights. Like, if he came out blasting, I'm a sitting duck. In all reality, I was a sitting duck.
Right.
But my thinking was, you may get me, but I'm going to make sure I get you too. So I was ready for him to poke his head out. If he poked his head out just a hair,
I was just going to ask you, were you timing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
figured someone like you, it's exactly what I was going to say. Are you timing his movements, his head?
I knew where he was, and the minute I saw anything, like I never saw it. Like even when he shot at me, I never saw it. I never saw him because, well, what he did was he just poked his arm around. So I never saw his face. I never once saw his face. He just poked his arm around the side there.
Not only being shot at, I mean, there's a point, at least for police, you're ready to take a life, which is also not insignificant to the incident, right? Like you're worried about your own life, but I am prepared, or you were prepared at that time, to pull the trigger if you had to.
I was, and the funny thing is I was not thinking about any consequences to pulling that trigger. And there's consequences. We've known enough guys in shootings.
Yeah.
The consequences of taking another life, as far as the investigation goes and things of that nature, is so huge. I mean, obviously, it's so huge.
Yeah, that's just not.
Mike sat 15 weeks with an indictment, murder indictment over his head. So I didn't really care. Like in my mind, it was life or death. When I'm on that deck, it's life or death.
Yeah.
After the fact, I mean, even if, and I think about this every once in a while. Like we expected him to come out and try to do suicide by cop, but I'm thinking to myself, I probably wouldn't have shot if he came running out the back door, gun in hand. Unless he points that gun, you can't shoot him.
Isn't that? It's so like. It's just a bad thing. You know what I mean? You're thinking about losing your job or going through, a 15-week indictment. That's just.
It shouldn't be part of the rules of engagement,
right? I mean,
you did this.
It was like just like that. Law enforcement. I've never been shot at as a police officer, but I obviously in the military. I mean, that's something we did on a daily basis. I wasn't thinking about. Listen, hey. Am I going to have to do a report? Like, I'm thinking about saving my men.
Well, think about how different the rules are from the military to police. So in that same mode of thinking, and we all know that's the reality of
But
it.
what you went through, that's combat.
That's combat, right?
Right.
But can you in that same mode of thinking, they would have had to wait for Bin Laden to watch him and get evidence of him planting a bomb before they would be able to kill him.
Right. No,
That's insanity.
Right. It is.
I think that's what separates, and believe me, like I think that's. I'm not trying to say anything about any of the other emergency services, but that's what creates a clear distinction between law enforcement and perhaps the fire service or emergency medical services. Right? The calculus of your mind that's going on at that point is not just life-saving for yourself and life-saving for the other person. There is this calculus of thought that you're taking steps out about the indictment. Do I lose my job? Is this going to be a good shoot? Is it going to be a bad shoot? It's not a straight pathway. That's not insignificant to your incident either, I feel.
It was a lot of, after the chaos happened, then I had some time to think, and I was able to think about it more clearly. So I did start thinking about it then, but while I was on the deck, I didn't care. Like, I would rather go home. It's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
Right. Yeah.
So I had that mindset at the time, but the adrenaline afterwards. So the adrenaline was crazy afterwards.
Yeah.
And we, I don't want to beat a dead horse. We all know the backslide that I had afterwards, which was unexpected. I felt like a giant pussy because I wasn't shot. Mike, you've been fucking firefights and mortars thrown at you, and Tom, you've had your hairy calls and stuff like that. But I felt like a giant pussy because I wasn't shot. I got off relatively unscathed, and that was the hardest part for me. That was the hardest part about my mental decline afterwards and subsequent actions and stuff like that. But I want to spend some time on speaking about, I'm 11 years removed. And at about year 7 or 8, I don't know what had me start thinking about Anthony Vocaturo. I started to change. Like, I used to, after the shooting, and after I had to retire, I was so mad at this guy. I was just, if I see him, you motherfucker, you ruined my life. I started to empathize with him. And that's why Dear Chris's question was so important. I started to empathize with him. And I also started to realize that he wasn't shooting at a police officer. At Kevin Donaldson. He was shooting at a police officer. So I started thinking to myself, what do you have to go through in order to shoot at police twice on 2 separate occasions, and want to murder your girlfriend? Like, what pain were you feeling in order to get to that point? I don't know if I could ever get to that point, but he did. So
his path would be an interesting one to find out about.
I know where he lives.
Even his life experience that brought him there. Listen, I can't.
I know exactly where he lives.
You're more forgiving than I think I would be, but.
Because once I did that, once I started empathizing with him and started feeling sorry for him, I took away all his power he had over me. Because when I was angry, he had so much power over me. He ruled my life. Once I flipped that on its ear, it was like
healing.
It was a weight that came off of me.
Mm.
And now, 11 years later, looking at it through different eyes, was it really a tragedy? Look where we are.
Look where it set you.
Look where we are.
Look where the course.
We in the beginning of the show, we went through all the great things that have happened, and none of it would have been possible without Anthony Vocaturo. So once I forgave him internally, and once I started looking at all the strengths that he provided me, I don't hate him at all. At all. As a matter of fact, if he's sitting across from me, I'd like to hear this out of his mouth. That's my joy. Like that if I had to ever end this show, the way I would like to end it was talking to him and finding out what he went through. How did you get there? What is it going on? What was going on in your head? And I would like to hear it from his perspective, because I'm sure this is my perspective. I'm sure I'm missing details or I got details wrong. I don't know. This is the way I remember it.
Do you have in your mind you mentioned it in general, but do you have in mind maybe 3 specific questions? Like if you were limited to 3 questions, let's say, would you have ones in your head that you think you would lead with? Like what would be like the top 3 things that you would want to know right from Jump Street from him if you were to speak to him?
So I know he got sentenced to 6 years. He did 4 for attempted murder on a cop, but that's not his fault. That's the justice system's fault.
Yeah.
The department never did any type of Vine forms for me. I was never able to give a victim impact statement. So they dropped the ball on that one big time as well. My first question to him would be something, how we end the show. It's like, you had to go through quite a bit. How's life different now?
Yeah.
Like that's the primary question. And, there was a couple of them. Like, what was your initial intention on coming up here? I'm sure his initial intention was trying to get back together with his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, listen, and when she was resistant to it, that's when things got hairy.
Did he have priors at the time?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think he had anything violent anyway. He was in construction.
Do you think he's aware of your complete journey from that time, or maybe just a little bit?
He's aware of me. That I know. And the reason I know that is because my friend John Elite knows him. He knows him, and we've attempted to reach out.
It's a small world.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to paint it.
Yeah, it's he knows him. So I know he's aware of me, but prior to that connection, I don't think he understood. I don't think he knew the damage that he caused. And you know what? I'm glad I didn't get a chance to meet him while I was going through all the bad stuff and a lot of anger towards him. Because I think if we were ever to come face to face, I think things would have been much different.
For sure, I bet.
Yeah, the mugshot that'll be shown up on screen, that was him. I think he was 51 or 52 years old or 50 years old, something like that. So he's in his 60s now. We all have made bad decisions. His bad decision was a really bad decision, and I don't think he understood the consequences of his bad decision.
Because it had cascading effects on not just you, your family. Correct.
And so part of me sitting down with him would be something to the effect, it would be, I think it would be very hard. My wife would not like me to do it. I think he would be more nervous than I would, though. He doesn't know what my mindset. I might jump across the table and put my arms around him.
Do you believe he would have empathy for it?
To sit down with a soldier on the opposite side of the battlefield after the war's done, I watch guys from Gettysburg do that, and I look at that with envy because I can't imagine how healing that is. I can't imagine how good that must feel, because, if you take Gettysburg, for instance, so the guys from the South were fighting for what they believed in. The guys from the North were fighting what they believed in. None of them are wrong. Legally he's wrong, but he was feeling a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, there is something, I guess, to be said. I remember the episode from Band of Brothers at the end when there's the German soldier or general, and he was ready to surrender his sidearm.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And he, being the bigger man, he said, "No, you can keep your sidearm."
Right, because it's a respect thing.
Absolutely.
Now, Anthony put me on a path. He put me on a path that I was supposed to be on. So you're always, I'm a big believer, you're always right where you're supposed to be. Had he not done that, I probably would have never met you guys.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand that.
So I think the last, and it's not a question, is the last statement I would say to him is I want to thank you. Although it sucked, a lot of it really sucked.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for what you did, because the gifts that were bestowed upon my life because of this awfulness I would have never been there. I would have never gotten there. You know, if Mike DePalma didn't go through the things that he went through, who knows? We would have never met. All right? If you never went through what you went through and you're still fucking knee pad boss, I'm sorry. I had to do it. I had to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I have another?
You know,
The Suffering Podcast.
Who knows?
Come
Well,
to
you
have
could-
your confidence
you
removed.
could have sucked your way all the way up to DC. But you know, if you didn't go through what you went through, we'd never met.
No.
So you know, karma has a way of fixing things and rearranging things.
It's not only us. I mean, so many people that came in and out of here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, 100, and this is 191. All 191 people that I got across and get a lot. And so, I will tell you this: over the course of this podcast, hearing all these different stories from both criminals and cops and this side of the law and that side of the law and different walks of life, it's made me really look at his life and really want to dig into him. If that ever happened, but again, I don't think he would ever do it because I think he would be scared of what I was going to do. I really do. I think he would be scared of what I was going to do. And little does he know that I harbor no ill will towards him. I harbor ill will towards the boss that ran away from me and left me for dead.
That is unforgivable for me.
The only solace I have in that is he's got to look himself in the mirror. It's the only solace I have. You know,
Did you say anything to him afterwards or no?
never.
I would have definitely smacked him.
So there was one time, and I fucking screamed at this guy. They were at an event together. This boss and a guy I know, and he's like, "Hey, I'm here with this guy, and you know, we used to work together." I'm like, "That motherfucker," and I just unleashed on this poor guy who was just saying, "Hey, I met this guy from your department." How many times has somebody come up to you and say, "Hey, so you're on you're on Montclair, and do you know this person?" And this person is not a friend, and you get that look in your face. You're like,
Yeah. I
Maybe
know
you should
him.
hang the phone up.
It depends.
It's him.
It depends on which Joe.
So it's happened to all of us. It's
Yeah.
happened to all of us. God, I wish I could have the opportunity to talk to the guy because I really, really would want to. I'd love to hear what was going through his head and what his experience was. Hey, who knows? This guy could have went to prison and got Shawshanked right up the rear end. Right? Who knows?
Do you think there's anything that he would say to you that would actually it would just put you right back where you were at that moment?
No.
This whole like even the clock comes right to my, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, it's a preparation thing. So I know he's never spoken publicly about what he did, but I don't know if he's ever. I've mentioned his name enough. So we talked about that earlier. It's like I mentioned his name because I want him to hear it,
Yeah.
and I want him. I used to do this with when my wife wasn't talking to her father, and he was a cop. And I used to badmouth the shit out of him because all I wanted him to do was to call me up because I wanted to reunite him. That was my main goal, but I did it very backhandedly. I would just badmouth the shit out of him. That motherfucker, yeah, he's a fucking piece of shit. I just want him to call me up and say, "Hey, bro, stop."
Yeah, get a rise. Just get a reaction, a contact.
Something. And that way it would open up the conversation. Well, like, your daughter wants to talk to you. You know, that was my thinking. So if I say his name enough, nobody's ever told me to stop saying his name.
Yeah.
So until I'm told to stop or given that that proverbial cease and desist, I'm not going to. And I don't think I ever will. So, you know, guys, we're kind of coming to the end of this thing. And I purposely stayed away from my mental decline because I wanted to really just get into the shooting and get two other cops' perspective on it. But I know it's taught me a ton. But I want to, so you hear this again, and I know you guys have heard this before. Hearing this portion of it, this suffering, what do you think it's taught you? Mike, I'm going to start this off you.
What you went through, or
Just what is this story taught you?
things that we do in law enforcement have a major impact, not only in, you know, your life, my life, his life, your family's life. And, it's the support you get when something like a traumatic incident does happen. That's extremely important. I guess it teaches you restraints throughout the years and how to control, certain situations in your life when you go through a traumatic, it might not be as drastic 10 years later if something like that ever happened again. You'd be mentally prepared. I guess it sets you up for, hey, I know what to do. I know how to do this.
Tom, what do you think?
So I think that the theme that kind of surrounds this whole thing is empathy, right? Sort of at the start where we started, now we're at the end. For myself, my gas tank and my empathy meter is not as full as yours yet.
Yeah, I couldn't.
Only when you forgive can you take away somebody else's power over you. Listen, I'm not telling anybody to forgive these awful things. I'm just telling you my personal experience.
But what I can say is it's encouraging. The three people in this room right now, how we were kind of connected, is almost an unbelievable story in itself. But seeing how you and your story is deep, it gives me hope for myself. I'm there and I'm working towards it. And you guys, having this platform and just us sitting here looking in each other's eyes, not too long. I'm up here.
Guys,
Keep them up north.
Guys, just don't make eye
Stay
contact.
here. I'm just trying to figure.
No, but seeing that wound, the wounds are in the eyes, and the journey that you've come along, it gives me hope, and I'm gonna get there, hopefully to where you are.
You could see you telling the story and knowing you all these, the time I have. You could see how it affects you now.
It's different.
I could see it.
It's different. First time I ever told it, yeah, it was tough. This is the 7,000th time. So
Walking amongst the dented,
yeah,
has value, and it's encouraging.
So Anthony Vocaturo has taught me a lot. Okay, but he, just to encapsulate everything, just to piggyback on what I said to you, without forgiveness, there's still a lot of people I have to forgive, and I know I have to forgive them. I'll get there. I'm a work in progress, just like everybody else. But until I forgive these people, they always will have some sort of power over me, and I don't want them to have any more power over me. The time has passed. So I know once that forgiveness happens, and it's not as easy as to say I forgive you. You have to really, honestly, in your heart, forgive them.
Yeah.
But Anthony Vocaturo has put me on a path. And in my mind, it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. Maybe being a cop was just a conduit in order to get here. Because this is something that I really love. It's something that I enjoy. It's something that I take very seriously, doing this show and going out and talking to people and helping them through their journeys. That's what gives my life purpose. It gives me more purpose than being a police officer. And I know that sounds very odd to sitting here in front of two other cops. I know it sounds very odd, but that's the truth. Sitting here on the Suffering Podcast, talking to people, letting them unleash their pain and their trauma gives my life purpose and gives me a reason to get out of bed. And it still gives me that same drive. And without Anthony Vocaturo, none of this would have been possible. So I'm grateful to him. I know that sounds weird. Guy tries to kill you, but you're grateful for him. It's truth.
He's earned your empathy.
Yes, he has. Thank you guys very much for sitting in here on this one.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast, the suffering of my shooting. And unfortunately, because I talked most of the time, I didn't learn very much. But let's talk about the stuff that we learned. Focus often comes with trauma. Lack of leadership is more detrimental oftentimes than a bullet. Perspective dictates your history, but most importantly, I'm right where I'm supposed to be with my best friends. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast. Don't forget to go to popple.com, put in the code TSP20 for a 20% discount on your digital business card. Follow us on all social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, Clapper, now on Rumble, OnlyFans. And follow me at Real Kevin Donaldson, and of course follow the Suffering Podcast, and we're going to see you on the next episode.